What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the early read, and the long grind is finally over. It is game week. We have college football games to talk about. There's no more will it be in a few weeks? We got this spring practice to get through. No. We got college football games starting this Saturday. We are recording this a week before this is coming out, Monday morning of game week. So really pumped to get into it. The preseason pods have been really great, and I always like to say, when I go through the preseason process and going through each team and win totals, it's almost like working a muscle, getting used to it, like reading the schedule analysis, talking about, certain teams, looking at my resources, whether it's online, reading quotes. It's kind of like working that muscle out. And I feel like now I'm in good shape on that. And it's nice to now, as I've been doing throughout the summer, but really now talk about games and react to injury news, and we're going to start to build some data points very quickly, and that's another muscle that I'm excited to start working out. I'm a little out of shape on that, so I'm pumped to get into that. And to do that, we bring on a guest we had on during the preseason circuit. He helped us with the MAC conference preview. He is back again. StepOnADuck at StepOnADuck1 on Twitter. He's going to be doing some work for the Action Network. He's going to be freelancing for them. So he's been on the podcast grind this entire summer. He does great work. He's always done great work, and I'm pumped that he's finally getting the shine that he deserves. Duck, thanks for coming on, man. Happy season. We're finally here. How you feeling?
Feeling really good. All the hard work in the off season that we have done is really going to pay off, and I just can't wait for game week to get here. And I mean, we've been waiting for 200 days for this, and it's the best time of the year for sure. I love the turn of fall and cannot wait to fire up must-see TV and get the action started for sure. So super excited about that.
Yeah, so how this episode is going to work, we are releasing this Monday morning on game week. So this is going to drop on August 19th, and week 0 is going to happen. There's only 4 games this year, 2 FCS, FBS teams, and then 2, we'll say 1 relatively competitive game, another likely blowout. And we're going to do some week 1 stuff as well. Duck is very well versed in the FCS rank, so I want to get his thoughts on some of these high-end FCS teams that are heading up to play some FBS teams. So that's how this episode is going to go. If you want to check the podcast description, there's going to be timestamps as always. But let's waste no time, right? Let's get into these games. We've been waiting long enough. I'm a little interested. At the time of this recording, been some marginal movement, I would say, throughout the summer. Few numbers have moved, but nothing too crazy. The first game we're going to talk about, there's been some subtle movement, and that's Florida State-Georgia Tech. This game in Dublin, Ireland. We got ACC matchup. This is a pretty interesting setup here. The Noles, obviously undefeated year last year in the regular season. They don't make the college football playoff after Jordan Travis's leg absolutely snaps in half. They travel to Dublin now. New look team, DJU playing quarterback. They lose 13 players to the NFL from last year's team. 10 draft picks, 3 undrafted free agents. So a lot of turnover here. Mike Norvell going to count on the transfer portal to make it work with DJ Uwe, Ungalite, and company. The Georgia Tech team that listeners of the podcast really enjoyed them last year. Exciting team. I think played some tough competition very well. The offense really exciting under Buster Faulkner. Keep an eye on that name. Haynes King looked very strong. This is an offense that was top 35 in the country in terms of EPA per play. Defense, though, is an absolute sieve. Outside top 100 in yards per play, EPA per play, defensive line yards. You name it, they were probably really bad at it. Complete turnover there. They go to Dublin now, Duck. Any thoughts on this game? I guess if you look a certain way, this is like right for this game gets really weird very quickly for a new look FSU team. But does Georgia Tech, is the leap coming that fast? We got a line as of this recording, 12.5 in favor of the Noles. Total saying at 56.5.
Yeah, and the market's taking money on Georgia Tech, right? This opened 14 or 14.5 earlier in the summer.
There was an 11. There was an 11 for a little bit. We're recording this on Wednesday, so Wednesday morning there was 11. So there was some push to 11. Now the FSU backers have entered the market, so it's a little bit of a tug of war here.
Couple things at play, right? There's a little skepticism on Florida State. They lose a ton of talent, a lot of defensive talent lost to the NFL. They lose some skill guys. Their quarterback is gone, and do we trust DJU, right? He's on his 3rd team in 3 seasons for a reason, right? I think if Jonathan Smith might have stuck around at Oregon State DJU might have had to transfer out of necessity because he may have lost the job to their second string guy who was beating him out late in the season. And there was some talk that maybe DJU wasn't going to be the number one guy this upcoming season. So I think that there's some things at play with the market, maybe not necessarily trusting him, and there's going to be some rebuild. But where this game is going to be won and lost, in my opinion, is in the trenches, and there is a staunch contrast in talent. Florida State, I believe, will just dominate the offensive trench, and I believe that they should have no trouble moving the ball on the ground, and then they'll play action off of it, and they should be able to get DJU some comfortable throws. Even with new skill guys and working out the timing and things of that nature, they should have a lot of success with that. And then when Georgia Tech is on offense, golly, it's just really hard for me to see them moving the football with any real consistency against that really tough front seven of Florida State. And it's just one of those things where I think there's too much of a trench disparity to really want me to back Georgia Tech, but there's also the wild card of this game being played overseas across the pond, and field could be sloppy.
Yes.
There's been games played there in the past where field conditions have just been atrocious, and that can be an equalizer. So really not 100% sure what to expect in this matchup.
So I think, one, again, we're in Dublin, Ireland. Rain could be a factor. I looked earlier in the week. It said rain. I looked today. It said no rain. Just said overcast. So we'll see on whether what I'm interested in seeing, I think you bring up a good point in terms of the difference in size on the trench and where Georgia Tech really struggled last year. Scoring wasn't an issue for them, but the defensive line was a big, big issue. Mm-hmm. Again, only 55% returning production. They bring in former Duke defensive coordinator Santucci to run up the defense this year. We'll talk about that in a second, but my issue is if Georgia Tech's not able to get pressure on DJU, which they didn't do last year, and I don't think we're going to see much of a change. Georgia Tech last year, and maybe there's an uptick, but they were 115th in sacks last year, 18 total sacks. They were 128th in defensive line yards. DJU last year under pressure, really good. Completed about 65% of his passes, at 13 big-time throws to 3 turnover-worthy plays, average about 9 yards a pass. So when DJU has time, that's not the issue. He's a veteran. I trust him. It's when the play breaks down and he has to go off script a little bit, which Jordan Travis thrived on. That's what DJU can't do. I don't know if Georgia Tech's going to be able to bring that up in this game. Now, let's talk about Georgia Tech's new defensive coordinator, Santucci. Last year, Florida State played Duke, and it was a really shaky start. I think Florida State it was like a scoop and score or something. There was a defensive score, something or another. Florida State ended up winning pretty easily in that game, but it was a slow start. Second half, they pull away.
Misleading final for sure, yes.
Yeah, I believe it was a slow start, and maybe this was the game where Riley Leonard tried to play on a bum wheel because Duke was still in it for ACC championship game, and he couldn't go, and it went to the backup. But so FSU in that game against Santucci, obviously Duke defense averaged 6.37 yards per play, 54% success rate. That was 95th percentile in 2023 games. So FSU, Norvell, I know the team is different, but at least this offense, who has continuity at coordinators, they knew how to cook that Duke defense. So pretty good starting point there. I will say I like the over in this game. I bet 55.5. I know it's 56.5. We do what we can, but I think I like Buster Faulkner. There's a lot of turnover on the defense. I know that there's still talent on the defensive line, but losing a first rounder like Jared Verse, I know Florida State, they have Jones Jr., and this is a talent-rich program. That still hurts when you lose a first-round pick and you're not like Georgia or Alabama. So I trust Georgia Tech, who has been able to score on a handful of teams in this offense, a lot of continuity coming back. They return Georgia Tech north of 80% of their snaps or their production from last season, as I pull that up. Georgia Tech going into the year, they're 82.43% of returning production, including Haynes King, including their freshman wide receiver Singleton. Now I'm going off my memory here. And the running back, Jamal Hayes, 1,000-yard rusher. So there's a lot going on here for Georgia Tech that I think they could score. I'm not going to go for the outright upset, but I mean, can this be something in the neighborhood where Florida State gets into the 30s and Georgia Tech isn't too far behind? Maybe something like, 34-24 even, 34-27. I think Georgia Tech could keep up with this, but I think Florida State's going to be able to name their number. So I like the over here in this game.
Yeah, not a bad play, and the over's taken some money. And I think that a common misconception with weather is that rain and a little bit of a deteriorated field condition will prohibit scoring, when in fact it's exactly the opposite. When there's just rain and not a ton of wind, scoring can actually increase. It can be a boost to the offense because in game action, the offensive players know where they're going, and it's hard for defenses to react, and they typically will lose their footing. Wind is something to really keep in mind. If there's going to be a real wind factor, that would be one thing, because it's obviously harder to pass the ball, it's harder to punt, it's harder to kick field goals, it's harder to do anything. But yeah, I think the over is definitely something that I would consider. I think that you'll find an in-game situation where Florida State will get up and they'll be able to extend margin, and I don't see Georgia Tech having a lot of success with getting a ton of stops. And so then what you'll see is Georgia Tech kind of abandon any sort of run game plan that they might have, and Haynes King will be able to sling it, and he did that well last year. I like what they bring back on offense. So this certainly could end up being a bit of a track meet here, and I would suspect that Florida State should have no trouble getting to about 38 in this game. So yeah, 38-27, 38-24 certainly should clear the over.
Yeah, so over is my preferred play. Now we move on to the FCS ranks. Montana State travels to New Mexico. We got Bronco Mendenhall coming out of, I don't think it was officially retirement. Maybe it was like a sabbatical from coaching, but he's back. He goes to New Mexico, which was among the worst teams, excuse me, in college football last year. Montana State, and again, I'm not as well versed on FCS, so Duck, I'm going to kind of frame it more of I'm going to make this more of like an interview and ask some questions rather than maybe give a strong handicap on this one. I look around, I poke around, and Montana State, they travel there. They're 8.5-point favorites, total of 53.5. New Mexico is kind of going into this year pretty screwed. They need to replace all their offensive line, but I like what I saw from Dampier, the freshman quarterback, at the end of last year. Helped lead a upset win over Fresno, near win against Utah State in the season finale. Is Montana State worthy, even though they are an FCS rank? I know they bring a lot of production back. This is an elite offense in the FCS ranks. What do you make of the Bobcats now laying over a touchdown against an FBS team?
Yeah, it's a unique situation. We don't see oftentimes an FCS team on the road at FBS and being a favorite, and let alone more than a touchdown favorite. So it's a rare air, certainly for Montana State. They are certainly a top 4 or 5 team in FCS. They're going to be right there at the end, presumably deep into the FCS playoffs. They return a great quarterback, Tommy Mellott, who's been there for quite some time. He's played a lot of football. He's got over 3,200 career pass yards and 2,700 career rushing yards. So he's certainly a dual threat. And Montana State really likes to run their quarterbacks and get that extra blocker out there. So what'll be really interesting is Mellott has a history of injury. And last year they split reps with former Wyoming starting quarterback Sean Chambers, who's no longer there. He graduated and is now trying to make it in the NFL with the Panthers. But so the split quarterback reps situation for Montana State is going to be no longer. And so their plan is to pivot and to run the quarterback less. They run the ball a ton. They run the ball at 67%, quite literally 2-to-1 split. So they're certainly a run-oriented team. They're comfortable running the ball. They had a lot of success at their level last year doing that. They returned their top 3 running backs. So they're pretty loaded in the running back room. Offensive line is okay. They did lose some key pieces, and those pieces ended up being in the interior of the offensive line. Both of their starting guards from last year are gone. They did reach up to the FBS ranks to replace those lost positions, but it's going to take some time for the continuity, especially at the guard position when you're running the ball a lot of zone read, a lot of between the tackles running for Montana State. That's going to take some time to gel. And what'll really be interesting to see is I love the Bronco Mendenhall hire. He's a fantastic coach. He's won predominantly everywhere he's been. He's been a really, really good coach. So I want to see what he can game plan for kind of stuffing the box and putting 8 guys in the box and really making Montana State have to work for what they want to do. Now, Montana State also does lose a couple guys out on the skill position. Montana State runs a little bit out of the gun, a little bit out of the pistol, a lot of under center, but they were primarily a 21 personnel set, so they use at least 2 tight ends a lot, and both their starting tight ends from last year are gone. Now, they did have a guy come transfer in from Maine who's played a lot of football, and he'll contribute right away in the pass game and in run blocking. But I think there could be a little bit of kind of working the kinks out. Now, Montana State, I have them power rated as the better team. And again, it's rare air that they're a large favorite in the FCS ranks going up to an FBS team. There's a lot of unknowns with New Mexico, right? They're really starting from scratch, especially on offense. I like what Devon Dampier showed last year. Really a huge loss for them is their running back, Krosky Merritt, who went to Arizona. He was super explosive, a stud. A real dude. And so I want to see how they can replace the running back room. And New Mexico is just going to have to sustain possession of the football, and they're going to have to find ways to get some offensive continuity to stay in the game. I would say that the market recognized when this line opened up at 4.5 that Montana State was probably too short a favorite. Now that it's up over 8.5, we haven't seen it yet, but I do see that at this point, I actually have a play on New Mexico plus 8.5 in pocket, and I think that we'll see a real spirited effort from them. Right, we've got a situation with New Mexico where they know they're not going to have a lot of wins on the schedule, and it's really going to be tough to establish momentum this particular year. But this is one that they feel in their mind they have to go out and give a max effort and try and get a win.
Yeah, it would be New Mexico or pass. It's just a lot gone. This team is bottom 3 in terms of returning production, 55% on offense, 40% on defense. Like I said before, replacing the entire offensive line. What I'm curious about, again, I would lean with you on New Mexico, just purely you're getting a pretty explosive quarterback. I like OC Jason Beck, was with Syracuse, has experience with Mendenhall. So I believe that this coaching staff could get something here with Dampier at quarterback, a true dual threat quarterback at that. I wonder what the tempo is going to be from New Mexico this season. Are they going to try and maybe push it a little bit with Dampier, maybe try and run some tempo? Because if that's the case, I wrote down over potentially. I'm not sure necessarily. I'm not as well versed in Montana State's typical pace and play call cadence, but over had my eye at 53.5. I think New Mexico could be a sneaky over team with just the depleted defense and if they're playing from behind, I do kind of like Dampier in garbage time, junkyard time, where it's time for him to just like make plays. So maybe over, but I would lean with you on taking the Lobos with the points.
Yeah, and I can honestly support that over position. I watched a lot of Montana State football last year, and there was a couple of different spots that I watched where they were clearly the team that overmatched their opponent. And what was surprising to me was their opener last year against Utah Tech at home, and then in week 3 they beat Utah Tech 63-20, but they gave up a ton of yards. They could not get stops in the second half, and Utah Tech just moved the football, ended up moving the ball for over 300 yards and punched it in 3 times. And then they played at South Dakota State up in Brookings, which was a close game. They did lose the game, but it was a really close game. And then they came back and they hosted Stetson. Now, Stetson plays in the FCS non-scholarship Pioneer Football League. So they are a Division I team, but they do not offer athletic scholarships. And so we'll talk about this in a future podcast. The Pioneer Football League is a great league to keep your eye on because you'll get teams that are playing high-profile scholarship FCS teams. And if the spread's not high enough, you'll know what to do. But Stetson, they were laying 48, and they controlled the first half. I think it was 35-0 midway through the second quarter. And then you just started to sense the apathy set in for Montana State, and they really quit caring. They rotated some other guys in, and Stetson, same deal. Second half, Stetson moved the ball whenever they wanted and scored 20 points. And I would have wanted to see from a real championship level defense shut those teams down, right? You might allow one score, but you don't allow 20 points and 300 or 400 yards against those teams that are just so severely mismatched. The other thing about Montana State is while they have been a really exceptional football team the last 3 years and have really put together dynamic seasons, only 5-6 ATS the last 11 away from home. So they're certainly a different team on the road, especially when you're talking about trying to cover a number. And so it'll be an interesting travel spot. Now, they played tougher FBS competition their last 3, but they got blown out in 22 by Oregon State, lost by 40 points. And they were able to hang close in 2021 with Wyoming. And then prior to the COVID year, they were blown out pretty badly by Texas Tech. So, I mean, they haven't had a lot of recent success against FBS competition, and really hard to go to the window and lay 8.5 with this team on the road, in my opinion.
Yeah, I agree. I got to mull on this one a little bit more. Excuse me.
But I could, based on what I saw with Montana State's too deep on defense, and they'll certainly rotate some guys in, right? The same 11 guys aren't going to play every snap on defense. And so there is, they've been susceptible to the big play and struggled to get off the field at times against lesser foes. And so, yeah, there could certainly be some points in this one. And New Mexico's not going to stop trying, especially with the new regime. And Mendenhall will have those guys ready. And it's kind of an audition, perhaps, too, for some of those guys. So let's see what they're made of for 60 minutes.
Yeah, definitely. Maybe even like New Mexico team total over, like forget like staying competitive, both teams scoring, maybe just like New Mexico. But yeah, something to chew on. I think definitely, in my opinion, an interesting game, because I think New Mexico comes in with a lot of questions, and I think we're interested to see. And I think even though it is an FCS foe, this is a good litmus test to see like what's New Mexico about. I think we could really, this will be a strong data point, I think, moving forward. I mean, I know they play Arizona in week 1. It should be interesting to see how the Lobos handle this game. Next up, the 2 nightcaps in week 0 might be a good weekend to tell the missus, we'll do dinner or something, or
don't wait up for me.
Yeah. So SMU travels to Nevada. SMU currently laying 27.5 at the time of this recording. I would not be surprised by the time this is posted if that number continues to go up. We got a total of 56.5. We got a new regime taking over Nevada, second time in 3 years. But to me, this is more about SMU, a loaded team making the jump to the ACC. Preston Stone, all systems go. Last year, and this has been a rub I've seen, because if you listen to the ACC preview, I am bullish on SMU, but I acknowledge the bear case on them that they struggled against Power 5 competition last year. They just absolutely dump trucked G5 competition, though, which Nevada falls into. They won by an average of 29.4 points per game last year against G5 opponents. That does not count the 69-0 drubbing of Prairie View A&M last year. SMU had no problem running up the score against lesser opponents. I think it was 55-0 against Temple last year. They put up 50+ against Tulsa. This offense wants to go. They want to rack up points. The number has moved quite a bit, but to me, at under 4 touchdowns, this is SMU. I see little reason why they can't win this game by 5 touchdowns at least.
Yeah, a couple things. So SMU is interesting because they are fresh off a conference title. They have a veteran roster. They have packed it in the trenches for 2 years while trying to get into a Power 5 league. They finally were able to do that. And they are definitely going to be a team that will make some noise and have some decisiveness in the ACC this season. And so from a talent perspective, there is absolutely no question they're head and shoulders above Nevada. Now, What I'm interested to see as well, Jeff Choate, great hire for Nevada, right? And they are probably a year or 2 away from really making some noise in the Mountain West, but they did hire a good coach. I think that they're going to maybe be more competitive than what we've seen in the past from certainly the last 2 Nevada teams that have finished 2-10 in 22 and 23. What I'm real interested to see is this, right? With the expanded playoff and 12 teams now getting in, and combined with SMU moving up in class, some of these teams are going to implement some load management at some point, right? And so what I could see is Does SMU have bigger fish to fry, right? Is there a motivation for them on the road to punch it in, to keep the starters playing deep into the fourth quarter? Or do they get up by 3 touchdowns? They feel like they're in pretty firm control. Maybe they rotate the twos in, and they'll certainly do that against Houston Christian in week 2. I don't know. I mean, I feel like they're pretty prepared for their ACC slate, but they're not playing Temple or Navy or Tulsa or FAU or North Texas or some of those weaker teams that transition into the American like they have been used to playing, right? Charlotte's not on the schedule. So in the past, they've had some teams where it's like, yeah, we'll go out and we'll roll it up, and then it's kind of an exhale spot. And I don't know if there's a lot of exhale spots. After BYU and the bye, you've got rival TCU and then the Florida State game, which is a monster, and then at Louisville, at Stanford, at Duke, and then they'll finish out ACC play. But I think that if you have a motivational spot to blast Nevada and it's just purely mano a mano, who's better than who, certainly would lay the 4 touchdowns. But I could see in these first couple of weeks for SMU, yeah, maybe we rotate the twos in and execute some load management. I have a feeling we're going to see that from teams this season, and for SMU, it's going to have to be early in the season because in the meat and potatoes of their schedule, it won't be a situation to do that.
So my only pushback, and I bet SMU early in the summer, so numbers gone. I still think under 28 is fine, but they went to Kevin Jennings last year when Preston Stone broke his leg, and they won the AAC championship game against Tulane. So I think even the question, they may rotate in the twos, but is the drop-off even that much? Because I think we could agree right now, you forget like load management. Like, what do I make this? I make this number huge. I'm well over here because I rate Nevada pretty poorly. I'm SMU 31.5. So I'm in on SMU for this one. But it's even the depth of this team should really show out in this game, even if they do start rotating in guys. And I imagine Jennings, who stuck around after the title team last year, maybe there's some expectation that he could see plenty of time. You know, maybe hey, Stone may not be 100% ready to go this season. Maybe it's Jennings. You could maybe end up taking more time. There's even packages for you as more of a dual threat. So I don't know. I think SMU, the talent mismatch is very apparent in this one.
Yeah, and you bring up a good point, right? If they have to prepare for a situation where Preston Stone goes down again, then you're going to want to get Jennings some quality snaps. You're going to want to continue to run your stuff. And so I could certainly see that situation playing out. And while there still may be a talent drop-off, it will not show against Nevada. One interesting thing is that could be value in an SMU team total over as well, right? You've got a spread where it's at with a total of 56.5, 57. Vegas implied is about 41.5 to 15.5 or so. So
yeah, something like that.
Could see
touchdowns ish. Are they going to score 6 touchdowns more or less?
Yeah, and I mean certainly they'll be able to, right? I think there's no question that their offensive firepower is elite, especially in this matchup. So yeah, it could be worth an angle as well. So I don't really have any objection to SMU, but I will be tuned into that one late, even in a blowout, to just see kind of what they do with their personnel and how they treat that, which will give us some insight for their second game of the season against Houston Christian.
Yeah, great point there. The nightcap, which is actually it will kick off on Sunday on the East Coast. Delaware State travels to Hawaii. Delaware State went winless in their FCS league last year. Hawaii, year 3 of the Timmy Chang era. If you listen to the Mountain West preview, you know I'm pretty bullish on this team. No plays preseason or anything, but I like where this team is going. I like year 3 of the run and shoot. Braden Traeger. I showed flashes last year, but the offensive line definitely needs to take a step forward. A lot of turnover-worthy plays there, but they like to chuck the ball around the field. This number has shot up. I mean, they're expecting an absolute blowout here. We got 38.5 Hawaii's laying against Delaware State as they make the trip to the island. Total of 55.5. Doug, I'll frame it this way. 38.5. How bad is Delaware State? And does Timmy Chang and the Rainbow Warriors, are they trying? I mean, we were just talking about SMU. Are they going to be interested? Is Hawaii going to be interested in even putting up even more of a beat down here? Or is Delaware State just that bad?
Well, a couple things that I'll just point out. So the first is that the run and shoot offense is such an intricate system, and it is extremely hard to master the timing. When you snap the football and you have receivers that are adjusting their route or possibly pivoting and running a different route on the fly, and the quarterback has to recognize that and make reads, it's really difficult to get a strong grasp on that in year one and even year two. And you saw that from Shager, right? Where it looked like he was careless with the ball, but at times it was just miscommunication with receivers. And that's why the interceptions were high. Usually year three in these systems is where the growth happens. And I read some reports out of Hawaii fall camp that there was there was some heat and some pressure put on Timmy Chang this year. If that's the case, I think that's ridiculous. This Hawaii job has become extremely difficult with the transfer portal and recruiting, and anybody who shines is going to get poached. And so I don't know what the administration is thinking if they're putting any pressure on him, especially with the job that he did last year, getting to 5 wins. So I would feel like he should feel like his job is safe, but I like what Hawaii returns, and I think this is really going to be a growth year for Hawaii, and I certainly think a bowl game is going to be in reach. Interestingly enough, they opted not to play a 13th game this year, and because Oregon pulled the plug on their week 1 opener with Hawaii, and that game's not happening, that's why they're playing Delaware State. So they have 2 FCS teams on their schedule this year, so Hawaii has to win 7 to go bowling, something I think they could do. But back to this particular matchup, I cannot stress this enough. Delaware State, when you talk from a power ratings perspective, a personnel perspective, this is one of the absolute bottom feeders in FCS. Now, there has not been a lot of literature that's been posted as far as team previews and personnel and what we're going to see on the field from these teams, but Delaware State is last year they were 1-10. Their 1 win of the season was against NCCAA participant Virginia-Lynchburg, who was very short on funding, was not able to pay their coach's salary. Reports were that they did not have a training staff. Their players were living in dormitories that had holes in the floor, and one of the players almost fell through the floor. I mean, this Virginia-Lynchburg win, it's hardly a college, it's hardly a football team. So they also lost against Division II, not FCS, but Division II, Bowie State. And in there,
Bowie State?
Bowie State.
That's like the wholesale Boise State?
Something like that, yes. And if you dive into their FBS competition, last year, Delaware State lost against Army 57-0. And they just had absolutely no resistance for Army's run game. And then Army, who couldn't throw the football very well last year at all, threw for 238 yards against Delaware State on only 11 completions. A lot of big blown coverages and wide open receivers that were just catching the ball in space, and no one was there to tackle them. And then another game that I'd like to isolate is Delaware State played Miami of Ohio. They lost 62-20. And it's kind of a shocker that they put up 20 points until I dove into really what happened in that matchup. So Delaware State played Miami of Ohio immediately the week after Miami of Ohio upset Cincinnati. And the Cincinnati rivalry with Miami of Ohio, as we talked about ad nauseum in the MAC podcast, it's a huge rivalry for Miami of Ohio with their very spirited contests. Those teams don't like each other, and Miami hadn't won in 10 years. And so Miami was super high off of this big rivalry win in a physical game in overtime with Cincinnati. How did they treat this Delaware State game? Did they use the game as kind of a quasi-bye week? Did they spend a little less time with their starting group in practice and a little more time in the injury room, getting the massages and getting the electrical stim and getting work done and kind of getting healthy? And then what you saw in the game was you saw a lot of the 2s play, you saw a lot of the 3s play, and there was really no motivation for Miami of Ohio to just absolutely put the hammer down on defense. And that's why Delaware State had success and posted a 20. And so if those two teams rolled out in the conference championship or something was on the line, Delaware State would not have sniffed nearly the success. So there was some circumstance involved in Delaware State having some success in that matchup. But you look at all the other teams they play. They were blown out by Richmond. They were blown out by South Carolina State. They were blown out by NC Central. They had a couple close games against some other MEAC bottom feeders, Morgan State and Norfolk State, and they lost those contests. So you're talking about a team that is just really terrible. And if you put on any sort of film, if you can sniff around and find some film on Delaware State, they are not even close to the same athletes that Hawaii is going to have on the field. So what you have now is you have Delaware State, who jumped in to fill this spot that Hawaii needed. They're traveling 5,000 miles. I'm sure that these players and the coaching staff has never been anywhere in the world as remotely beautiful as Hawaii. And I would suspect that these players are using this as kind of the wow factor of being in Hawaii. They're going to sightsee. They're going to soak in the beach and really create an experience for their players. But I cannot power rate this game high enough. I have it personally power rated at 43.5. One thing that I did do when FanDuel sloppily threw out a minus 27.5 is I posted it and max betted at the shops that it was up at, and I got as much money down as I possibly could.
Yeah, that's smart.
Because it was just a mistake line. And even at 37.5, I think that you can't power rate this game. You can't power rate this game high enough because you've got the game starting at midnight Eastern. So the body clock for Delaware State's going to be tough. I can't imagine they're going to be out there a week early to adjust. And the talent disparity is just absolutely staggering. I would only play Hawaii in this game.
Yeah. Again, Delaware State, I'm not as well versed in. Part of me thought with UCLA on deck for Hawaii, maybe this game, not competitive, but maybe the score line is a little bit more respectable where they cover, again, a gigantic line. But after discussing with you, I think now we know why this number is where it is on 38.5, and maybe it's even too short. Worth noting on Hawaii, just so we get into the thick of it, Stephen McBride, their stud wide receiver, we don't know. He came back to practice this week after some allegations. Unclear if he's going to be available to play in this game or moving forward. Just something to keep an eye on as Hawaii gets ready for their season. He was incredibly impactful for the Rainbow Warriors last year. Stephen McBride, he had, what did he have last year? Each had over 1,000 yards, I believe. Him and Ashlock, they're both back. So we'll see if they could get on the field in the Hawaii offense, at least could show something that we'll see before they play UCLA in week 1.
One last FCS nugget just to kind of put in your back pocket. So this Delaware State game starts at midnight Eastern time on Sunday morning for Delaware State. Then they'll play the game. They'll probably stay the night in Hawaii. They'll get home when? Monday. And then they go immediately back on the road on August 31st. They're at Sacred Heart. So that's another one to kind of sniff around for, get the best line. But I would suspect Sacred Heart would be a home favorite of about 9.5 there. Sacred Heart's not a good football team, but just merciless scheduling spot for Delaware State. And how do you turn around and get back Monday and maybe practice twice and then get on the bus and go to Sacred Heart? Not going to be good for them in week 2 either.
Yeah. Before we move on to some week 1 chatter, got some marquee games we want to hit on. We got some more FCS conversation as Duck helps us get ready for the season. Let me tell you about the early read sponsor, Rhythm. Rhythm is an app that makes predictive AI betting models accessible to everybody. Everybody hears about this model. I project this. I've been saying it even on this pod. Rhythm helps with that. They make creating betting models that are back tested over several years of data. They make it easier for you so you can get in on the sports betting action. Make sure you download Rhythm, RITHMM, in the podcast description below. Rhythm we're going to be doing content all year with Rhythm. I'm going to be sharing my model plays, everything to get ready for a successful college football season. So again, make sure you download the app Rhythm, that's RITHMM, and get started today. So Duck, let's move on to week 1. So we got some time before this. I will also caution, in the episode right before week 1, I'm going to try and do some injury lists, try and update as many people as possible on all the injuries. It's a labor of love to get these injury updates. There's been a lot this offseason So I'm going to try and weave that into this analysis. But for now, let's get into it. Let's start, in my opinion, with a polarizing matchup. Got Clemson taking on Georgia on a neutral site. Clemson, I am cautiously optimistic that the Tigers can get back to the top of the ACC. Georgia, obviously, the betting favorite to win the national championship. And look, you could still see, Clemson's the second choice in the ACC. Georgia's the betting favorite. There's about a 2-touchdown difference between these teams. Georgia right now, where I'm looking, 13.5-point favorite, total of 48.5 shade towards the over. Duck, before we get into necessarily the game, how do you figure Clemson this year? Are you thinking, at least I think, there can be a bump in this offense? Year 2 of Garrett Riley. I like the receivers that are here now, a little young crop. Cade Klubnik gives me pause and probably defines their ceiling a little bit, but I do think that this offense can be better because if you look at the body of work from last year, it was piss poor. I mean, Cade Klubnik could not throw the ball downfield whatsoever, and this team ranked 91st in EPA per play. So I imagine they're going to jump. It's how high. So what do you think about the Tigers this season?
This season will really be telling about the state of the program and really the state of college football overall. Clemson is the only team in America to not take a transfer. They're just ignoring the transfer portal, and they're really not utilizing NIL. They're recruiting on culture. They're recruiting on team unity. They're recruiting on kind of the Clemson way. And they fell behind last year, and it was evident. And one reason they fell behind is Klubnik didn't progress further from the 2022 campaign, right? You saw uncharacteristic of Clemson, but you saw turnovers. You saw unable to convert and stay on the field on third down. In those metrics, they declined. Uncharacteristic red zone chances where they scored nothing, didn't even get a field goal, right? They would just not be able to punch it in. And there's no better microcosm of that than their game at Duke to open the season last year, where they were
capped off like the worst betting weekend ever. That week one sucked. I was awful.
Right, kind of a Riley Leonard and Duke, Mike Elko coming out party, but also, I mean, Clemson they moved the ball up and down the field in that matchup, and 3 red zone turnovers, 3 trips with no points. That's why they lost the game, and you saw it. Time and time again, where their offense was missing something. And so what I'm interested to see with Shipley's a big loss, right? He was able to catch the ball out of the backfield. He was able to make explosive plays happen. And I'm sure they will have no problem replacing that. But Klubnik's got to take a leap this year, and he has got to put the team on his shoulders and own it and rise above it, because look at the other Clemson quarterbacks who did that. Deshaun Watson and Trevor Lawrence and Taj Boyd and players like that were able to rise above when there was adversity. If Klubnik's a dude, I want to see him do that. Now, the other thing that you have at play is Georgia was the best team all year last year, right? They were undefeated in the regular season, and most of their games were 3 or 4 touchdown blowouts, and they just didn't have a lot of sweat late in games at all. And they did lose to Alabama in the SEC title game, and they were left out of the playoff, even though they were probably -9 on a neutral against Texas or Washington. And
I gotta go back, but to me, they were the best team. Michigan a close second, and Georgia probably beats Michigan, I think.
So they made a statement in the bowl game, right?
Yeah.
Florida State wasn't happy to be there, and you saw the apathy, but it was 63-3. And I just wonder if this is a season for Georgia where they use that snub as motivation and they go on a tour, right? And we saw that a couple years ago with Alabama, where they had a down year and they were left out, and the following year they just destroyed everybody. And one thing that I am going to this game might feel like that Georgia-Oregon game from 2022, where it was kind of a close projected game. It was like a 13, 14-point spread. There was some betting action both ways. And I mean, 49-3 Georgia. So I don't know. I think that there is a case to be made for both sides. Clemson is very talented. They're certainly a top 10 or top 15 team. They're going to be right there at the end of the day in the ACC and at least have a say in what happens. Ugh, that Georgia train, after being left out, I'm sure they've been pissed off and used that as motivation all summer. I don't want to step in front of that. I could see this one being a 38-10 type game in favor of Georgia.
Yeah, I don't have a strong opinion on the game, but I will say that I think I'm going to sit on the sidelines because I'm interested to see, partly because I think that I am more likely to talk myself into like pro Clemson stuff than pro Georgia, and then the game kicks off and you bring up the Oregon Georgia game, which I think was like 45-6 or something, and then I just sit there with egg all over my face. I will say though, I am higher on Clemson. I am on the optimist side of Clemson. So I believe if you do like Clemson and you think this offensive line that was top 40 in line yards last year and only allowed 20 sacks, if you are on that side of it, maybe it's the over. Because even though Clemson's defense is always going to be its backbone, I think Georgia has probably the highest floor of any offense in the country behind Carson Beck. You could throw Oregon in there maybe, but I think we could agree Georgia is a truly elite offense. And this is still a relatively young Clemson defense. So maybe if you think Clemson's offense is going to be better, maybe it's the over, because if the offense is going to be better, one would think they could find a way to 14, 17 points, like mid-teens even, which with a total this low, 48 and a half, that's kind of all you need if you think Georgia's still going to be able to get there. So I guess I can make the best case I can make is for the over if Klubnik could take those steps and really thrive in this Garrett Riley offense. That being said, though, you look at what happened when TCU played Georgia in a Garrett Riley offense. That offense went absolutely nowhere all game. So I have a lot of push and pull in this game. I guess if I had to give out a bet, like if I had to make a bet, you gave me $100, I had to make a bet, I would say over in the game. But there is some fear that Georgia kind of steamrolls Clemson in this game. And again, I don't think like people might like say like, oh, here we go again with Dabo, like they're out. I'm not jumping off on a bad Georgia performance because that's not who I'm comparing Clemson to anymore.
No, and one thing that you could also do if you're really wanting to take a position is, and I don't typically bet a lot of games this way, but would you be absolutely surprised if these two heavyweights kind of feel each other out the first couple of series? They run the ball. There's some conservative play calling. You see them try to just move the chains. Maybe they play some field position. You might get a 3-0 game with 12 minutes left in the second quarter, and you might be able to pop a live over at like 36 and a half or so. That could also be something where if you do like an over, I would be a little surprised if there's haymakers thrown right away and you see bam, 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 14-7 after the first quarter. So in games like this, I mean, the last time they played, it was 10-3. And Georgia hasn't lost a regular season game.
By the way, they only scored on a pick six in that game. That was the determining factor.
Right. And, Georgia has not lost a regular season contest since the 2020 COVID year. So I don't know. I would say these games have a tendency to, at least early, you could see a little feel out and trying to kind of assess where you're at and let the trenches take over. And in this particular situation, if I was going to play over, I might watch 2 or 3 series and then pop something live, because after it goes punt, 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 that total will drop quickly.
Yeah, and also you could maybe get a beat on, did Klubnik improve this offseason? Does he look different? Or going through the PFF is pretty grim, but I mean, this is a guy who, he made 42 deep passes last year, made up 9% of his dropbacks. Everything is short. If that's, is Garrett Riley going to be able to scheme up some deep shots? And can Cade Klubnik take advantage of that? 6 big-time throws to 4 turnover-worthy plays on deep passes last year. Medium, intermediate, 10 to 19 yards, 5 big-time throws to 7 turnover-worthy plays. So an interesting game. I think, again, a really good data point, a really interesting watch. I just don't know if I have like an itch to bet on this one. Another one where haven't fired yet. Curious to see how I'm feeling come game week. I know where my numbers stand. I have a lean. I don't know if I'm going to follow through with it, but it's Penn State, West Virginia. These two teams met last year in Happy Valley, and I remember the lead up to the game was, wow, Penn State's about to absolutely destroy West Virginia, because if you remember last year, Neil Brown was getting fired. He was the presumptive favorite to be the first coach fired. West Virginia gave Penn State a bit of a run there. They were a 20.5-point underdog in that game. They famously don't cover because James Franklin, he seems to know the spreads, and he runs one in late in garbage time. Let's flip to this year, though. After West Virginia has this resurgent season, everyone's back in their good graces. They have a win total of 7 now, viewed as a factor in the new look Big 12. As I pull up the line here, Penn State's a 10.5-point favorite, total of 51.5. So, Doug, I'll let you go first, and I'll give you where I'm at psyche-wise heading into this one. But do you think West Virginia, you can imagine, this is an old-school Big East rivalry, you can imagine these guys, the Morgantown faithful is going to be rocking for this one. Can a new-look Penn State offense and defense show up for this one?
Well, the coordinator turnover is concerning, but they did make 2 excellent hires.
Yes.
And you get Aller back for another year. And so Penn State's a great football team. There is absolutely no question. They're going to be right there in the thick of it. And really a team like Penn State, where, the Big Ten, which now has 18 teams, has traditionally been a 2-horse race, and those 2 horses are obviously Michigan and Ohio State. This year it'll probably be Ohio State and Oregon, and Penn State's kind of been like that third wheel, right? Where if the team that they're playing is Ohio State or Michigan, James Franklin is 3-17 in his tenure at Penn State against those 2 foes, and so he has not had a lot of success against those teams. They are likely the biggest benefactor of the expanded playoff, because it seems almost assured that 10-2 or so is in their favor, at which point they would be in at large. Pertaining to this West Virginia game, there is no garbage time for James Franklin, right? I think he has been historically known, even back to his time at Vanderbilt. He knows the number. And say what you will about gambling in college sports, people bet on these games, and the people he talks to probably back them pretty heavily. So it's always one of those things where if this game is going to be kind of one of those Penn State's up a touchdown, they're going to salt it away. They're probably not going to salt it away. They're probably going to punch one in late and cover. And so it's just kind of one of those things where you have to keep an eye on the motivation for certain coaches to do certain things that could kind of raise an eyebrow and say, why the heck do they do that? Well, there's always a reason why. When the red phone rings, James Franklin answers it. I will say this: West Virginia is a team that I watched a lot last year. I bet on them a lot. I thought that they were really Big 12 darlings. I love what they did with running the football. They had great trench play, and it could be hard to duplicate that run that they went on in the middle of the season, which in the middle of that run, by the way, they lost on a Hail Mary to Houston, which was just disgusting. If you remember that game, they took
Thursday night, right?
What's that?
That was a Thursday night game or something.
Thursday night game at Houston, Dana's final season, coaching against his old team. West Virginia kind of blew some chances. They were down. They scored 2 touchdowns late to take the lead, and then Hail Mary as time expires. But I'm concerned about West Virginia and their ability to establish the run in this game, because they're at their best when they can establish the run on first and second down. They gash their opponent, and then all of a sudden they pop a play action pass, or they run some zone read quarterback stuff, and the quarterback will either keep it or he'll just flip it over the middle and do some pop passing. And they really used their big physical wide receiver group really well last year. So I want to see how they're able to establish the run, and if they can kind of continue a lot of that momentum that we saw at the kind of the outstretched portion of last season. I don't know. There's a lot of people that think that West Virginia is a live home dog in this matchup. So it'll be real interesting. The schedule spot favors Penn State, right? They just have Bowling Green on deck, and Bowling Green's going to be a great MAC team. We talked ad nauseum about them in the MAC preview, but Bowling Green is not going to beat Penn State. And then they have a bye on deck, and they don't really get into the thick of their schedule for some time. So Penn State will be solely focused on West Virginia. And the Mountaineers, on the other hand, I guess they'll be pretty focused too, since they just have Albany on deck. So we'll see. I don't know. At this point, the market has taken money on West Virginia, and there's some perception out there that WVU might be a home dog. That's live. I'm not there yet to want to step in front of that Penn State train, especially knowing what I know about how James Franklin manages those late game situations where he could take knees and doesn't.
So my numbers say West Virginia, and
I do too.
I see the reason. Like you can talk me into this a running home dog. You got Penn State with 2 new coordinators. Maybe it doesn't gel on the road. They don't even get like a tune-up game. This is like they're just going right into it. I know people talk about Drew Aller's spring game. There's also like 50-mile-an-hour winds in that game, so he looked terrible. But like, I'm not putting a lot of stock into that. So, and you look, West Virginia, they return top 10 in return production. Last year, they were 13th in yards per carry, top 10 in sacks allowed. They return pretty much everyone of substance. Garrett Green getting a lot of buzz. But my issue is when I go back to the Penn State game, and again, West Virginia was competitive in that game. They should have covered. Let's just call it what it is. They
very much agree.
To cover the game. They were 20.5-point underdogs. They just calling it as it is, though, they were outgained at a pretty healthy clip in that game. Penn State averaged 7.4 yards per play. West Virginia averaged 4.6 in that game. Penn State had 6 tackles for loss, including 3 sacks in that game. So I think West Virginia was competitive in that game, but they were never going to win. It was never like the game was in balance. Penn State they kept them close, but not enough to really cover with ease. There's a big perception change here because you go from a 20.5-point spread to a 10.5-point spread, and I get why it's moving that way. And my numbers agree, but it's can I get myself to the window? Because I do fear that this really good West Virginia offensive line, what if it's really good for Big 12 standards? And then when you face, for all intents and purposes, a top 10 team in the entire country, it's a little above their weight class. And you see Garrett Green struggle, who, there's a lot of buzz about him. People are, I think, what was it? He cooked at like the Madden Passing Academy or something like that. Garrett Green, if you go through what he did last year, it was a lot of junk ball throwing. It reminds me a little bit of Jalen Milroe. 27 big-time throws to 3 turnover-worthy plays. A quarter of his passes were more than 20 yards. This wasn't an offense that really moved methodically. It was kind of boom or bust and hope the running game could put them ahead of schedule before they could take a shot. Maybe the offense develops, and I could see where this gets squirrely for Penn State quickly, but I think I'm passing on this one, and I'm going to wait and see, and we'll see how Penn State looks. But part of me is itching to bet the Mountaineers, but there's just a lot of things coming back at me.
Yeah, and one last point. Let's just look quickly at last year and who West Virginia feasted on in their wins, right? Duquesne, they did beat Pitt in a real defensive battle. They didn't move the ball very well against Pitt. They beat Texas Tech, whose defense was TCU, whose defense was garbage. They feasted on UCF, BYU, Cincinnati, and Baylor. They got blown out by Oklahoma, blown out by Oklahoma State, lost at Houston, we talked about, and then the Penn State game. So when they did play up, it didn't go exceedingly well for them. So they feasted on a lot of the Big 12 newbies. And even this year, they have a really difficult Big 12 schedule. So we'll get into that in another discussion. But yeah, I don't know that they've played a defensive team of this caliber, and it'll be real interesting. I don't know that they feast enough to keep it within the number. As much as I want to play West Virginia, kind of one of those where you got to hold off.
reminds me a little bit of last year's Texas Tech, who had a lot of buzz going into the year, and it kind of fell right on their face. But it should be a very good watch for sure. A game that maybe isn't as public or as notable as some of the games we're going through. Michigan, Fresno State. We both have bets on this game, so I want to get into this one. Michigan laying a pretty healthy number against Fresno State. Obviously, Michigan national champion. They return next to nobody from their roster. It's going to be the Alex Orgy show, we imagine. You got Michigan laying. Now I can't find the number. I believe it's 21.5.
21.5.
21.5, total of 48.5. Duck, thoughts here on side and total Michigan, Fresno State?
Well, so both teams are obviously going through some coaching transition, with Jim Harbaugh going to the NFL and Sherrone Moore stepping in for Michigan, and Jeff Tedford, not surprisingly, but still poor timing, stepping down due to health issues. So Tim Skipper comes in. I think that there's a couple things going on here. So this just seems like a really bad spot for me to want to lay points with Michigan coming off the national championship game. Everybody's gone. They've got the horns on deck. And so, what's going to be the quality of Michigan's prep here? So are they focused all fall camp on Fresno, or are they prepping for Texas and USC and Oregon and all the Big Ten foes that they're going to have to play? How many players on their team? I know they've got some position battles that they're still working through in fall camp. So while you've got Phil Steele and Brett Ciancia and all these other guys that have their 22, they're all 22 kind of solidified. I don't know. There's some position battles that are still being battled for in camp, but how many of these guys are really grinding all fall camp and their mindset's going to be, oh, we got to beat the piss out of Fresno and we've just got to smash this Fresno team. You're crazy, in my opinion, if you think that they're going to start prepping for the horns on September 1st. I just don't see that being the case. Mm-hmm. And I think a lot of their offseason prep is going to be on a highly touted Texas squad. And so, when the TV turns on and you fire up the Big Ten network and they run out on the field, they'll be fired up. But anybody who knows anything about football knows that you play like you practice in the weeks leading up to a contest. And, Fresno doesn't have a lot after this that would cause them to kind of want to just pack it in. They play UNLV on September 28th. The run D actually last year wasn't too terribly bad. Their depth will be an issue, as their D-line and linebacker depth is not great. So they may break down a little bit later on in the year. And the coaching loss of Tedford will likely rear its ugly head late in the Mountain West schedule. Uh-huh. But I wonder how much that'll really matter in this game. And I like what I see from Fresno in situations where they're playing up, right? You just look back, even now the players are different and it's not always tangible, but 2021 at Oregon, they were 21-point dogs. They'd lose by 7. 2022, they played an even matchup with Oregon State. They were hosting Oregon State. They were winning the game throughout. Oregon State had a chance to kick a field goal to send it to overtime, and on the last play of the game, they ran quarterback power and punched it in and it was a walk-off touchdown to win.
I won't take us on too far of a tangent, but I remember that game vividly because Fresno's kicker missed, I think it was 2 chip shot field goals or extra points that would have iced the game ahead of time. This was Jake Hayner's team, and they should have won that game, I believe, in regulation. And Oregon State ended up running the QB power with some transfer quarterback who sucked, that couldn't throw the ball. He just was a big quarterback. But I remember that game very well, and I lost money on it.
And Jack Coletto is who that was. Who
yes, from Mississippi State.
I think so. Let's not. I don't want to bring up the bad memories because I was on Fresno as well. Last year they were at Purdue. They opened at like +7. It got down to like +4.5 or kind of no man's land +5. They won the game on the field. And then at Arizona State, which was a Pac-12 foe, it wasn't necessarily a situation where they were necessarily outclassed, but 3-point road favorites, they win 29-0. So they do play up. And the stage may not be too big for them where they get stage fright and it just falls apart early. So I really like what Fresno brings back, especially on offense. I think they've got a great pair of receivers that they're going to rely on. I think they'll be okay to run the ball a little bit. They may not certainly won't gash Michigan, but I think they can stay on the field. I really like Mikey Keene. I think he was much better than after Haener left. They had this Fife kid that they tried to continue to give chances to, and Mikey Keene was much better than what they had after Haener went down with injury and then ended up graduating or left early or whatever he did. But I think that there is a case to be made for Fresno to go in there and keep this one close, right? You have all off season now with Michigan. The players have been patted on the back, talking about how great they were last year and how they're going to be just great again this year. And it doesn't always work out that way. So I want to see how these teams prep. And I think this could be one of these like Rocky versus Apollo Creed, right? Where Apollo Creed's made it big and the prep isn't there and he's showboating and he's doing all this stuff. And Rocky's hungry and he's in the gym and he's pounding in the meat locker. And I wouldn't be surprised even if Fresno threw an early punch or two here and keeps this game very close.
So I see the game somewhat similarly to you, and I'm still high on Fresno State long term. I went with the under, though. So I project this at 48.5. So I don't see a huge numbers edge. It's right at the number, but I think that there's a reason to believe that this game is going to go under the total. Is there a coaching drop-off? Yes. I do think, though, that Sharon Moore is going to run this team similar to how Jim Harbaugh. I don't think it's going to be a smooth transition rather than a radical change. So to me, I look back at the last few years of Michigan when they didn't need to show anything. They showed nothing. It would not surprise me whatsoever if Michigan has a running clock, service academy style. I mean, you look at last year, team had the third slowest seconds per play mark in the entire country. Only Army and Air Force were slower than them. I don't see a reason with Texas on deck for Michigan to show anything in this game. I think they're going to run the ball 90% of the time. They're going to keep this clock moving, and they're going to try and get to next week. We don't know if Alex Orji could throw the ball. Why would they show it against Fresno when they have Texas on deck? So I agree. I think this game could be a little bit more competitive than maybe a 21.5-point spread would indicate. I just think it's going to be the under because I think Michigan's defense is still going to be absolutely nasty. They're going to be a top 5 unit in the entire country. I think they're going to suffocate Fresno's offense and really just going to be a running clock the whole time. So 48.5 to me. I remember last year against ECU, game was pretty low scoring. Michigan did not cover the massive spread. I believe they won like 34-3. Against Bowling Green, they actually kind of played with their food a little bit. Maybe that's some credence for Fresno State. I just more think I'm most confident in the under because maybe Michigan's size and physicality is just too much for Fresno in the jump, and that's what kind of scares me. And maybe it's Michigan 34-3 or something. I don't know. So I more prefer the under as my best bet, but I would lean towards the Fresno State side as well in this one. So under 40.5, that's a bet I made for week 1.
I like it. And just one last thing to add, if you don't mind, I think it's interesting that Michigan last year, despite the fact that they were a great team and they won the national championship game, 0-4 ATS to open up, right? They didn't cover against East Carolina. They piddled around with UNLV for a while. And UNLV played pretty competitively in that game. And then Bowling Green obviously showed some things that confused McCarthy, and Bowling Green hung tough in there. Their first 4 games of the season, the first half under also hit with relative ease. So if you like an overall under, I would try to find a 24.5, and I wouldn't hate a position on a first half under. You might see a 14-3 or 14-7 or 10-7. Last year in their first 4, again, they beat East Carolina in the first half 23-0, 21-0 against UNLV. Bowling Green was 7-6. And then the Rutgers first half was, let's see what it was, 14-7 at half. All four were first half unders. And so you've got a trend in the non-conference with Michigan where they're not showing as much. And in this case, it could certainly be no different with Texas on deck. Could certainly see one of those keep it close to the vest, run what you have to, show what you have to, which is very little. And I could support a first half under as well.
Yeah. And I think especially like, again, if they go up 2 touchdowns quickly, like what's the point? Like they're not looking for style points. They don't care. They just want to get to next week against Texas.
Right.
So one more marquee matchup I wanted to get to, because I think it's an interesting one as well. LSU, USC in Vegas on, I believe this is Sunday night. Yeah, September 1st. 6.5. The Tigers are laying against the Trojans. Again, this is, I call it neutral. I imagine LSU is going to travel for this one. Total of 62.5. I think these are two teams with a lot of questions entering the year. Is either defense going to improve? What is the state of two offenses that just lost the last 2 Heisman Trophy winners? So I think there's a lot of question marks here. LSU laying a big number. My numbers support a play on LSU, but intuitively I'm a bit scared of laying it with the Tigers, just given what this team has done as a big favorite over the last few years under Brian Kelly. There is some turnover, though. I think Garrett Nussmeier is decisively better than Miller Moss. I think that LSU's skill position players, maybe not as well known as the likes of Zachariah Branch on USC, but I think LSU's in pretty good shape on the offensive side of the ball. It's more, can the defense slow down Lincoln Riley's offense, and what is the state of that Trojan offense? So, Duck, any thoughts here on LSU, USC again? Tigers laying 6.5, total 62.5.
I think they lose. LSU loses a ton of talent on offense. They had 3 first-round picks that they lost, and they have some holes to replace. I think the defense is still going to be questionable, but they have to improve on that side of the ball. And I think that when you close your eyes and picture LSU, it's vaunted defense. It's teams that it's hard to score against. It's hard to move the ball against. And that hasn't been the case for a couple of years. USC's defense last year was atrocious and couldn't get stops, couldn't put teams away, and just continued to allow teams to move the ball up and down the field. I mean, you saw it time and time again. Colorado, Arizona State, Arizona. They got smashed by Notre Dame. Utah, California scored 49. So there's a lot of growth on both defenses here. Interestingly enough, I was listening to some preseason literature and some publications that were out there about these two teams, and really the total focus is defense for both in camp. I took a position on under 66.5 just because I thought that the number was mispriced. That doesn't necessarily mean that the game's guaranteed to go under, because 62.5 now. My numbers had 61.5, so I did make a play just based on my numbers that I lean into, and I could possibly come back the other way and try and get the best of both worlds on that one. But I mean, are we positive that USC isn't the better team here in Vegas in a neutral with easier travel and kind of some better circumstances surrounding this game compared to what's going on over at LSU? I'm not so sure that I wouldn't find. You still might find a rogue 7 out there.
Yeah, I wasn't high on USC going into the year. I'm kind of ambivalent on LSU, but I definitely think USC money line is like appetizing, because this game could very quickly be proven to just be a coin flip, right?
Has to be in the round robin anyway, right?
Right. Like that's like it has, like, especially because week 1 we don't need to get into it that much, but just like the week 1 underdog round robin, it's not super appetizing to begin with. I think it's a pretty weak underdog week 1, in my opinion. Like, how is this one where it's clear that on the right day, these two teams are probably a coin flip? I mean, you look at 2 new defensive coordinators coming in. USC last year, 115th in EPA per play. In my opinion, the worst tackling unit in the entire country. LSU was even worse, 120th in EPA per play on the defensive side of the ball. I do think that there's a fair amount of question on if Miller Moss could execute this offense against an SEC level. While LSU's defense was poor, there's still a size and talent aspect that they have. There's still guys on the unit. To me, it's more of a coaching thing than the talent of the player. So can Miller Moss show up in that spot instead of like a bowl game against the patchwork Louisville defense? Because we know Garrett Nussmeier could play. And I don't know how much of a jump we're going to see from USC so quickly on the defense side of the ball. I do think on the right day, you could see LSU take a pretty big jump on the defensive side of the ball. All that being said, though, it's tough not to like the dog in a game like this. And I agree with you on paper because I'm surprised at how low I am on the total as well. And I'm sure some of that is baked into the loss of Caleb Williams and Jaden Daniels going into the preseason numbers. I find this one probably being a shootout, right? Like fast track, Allegiant Stadium in Vegas, dudes everywhere. Just how are they not scheming up open plays? How is Lincoln not scheming up open plays? So I lean towards USC. I'm kind of in knots on what to do with the total. I haven't made a play myself just yet.
Yeah, I mean, the over just seems too easy, right? And I don't think that Vegas makes mistakes very often. And when they come out with a 66.5 and a lot of respected money in the desert starts pounding the under, and they're all saying the same thing, and this total drops below key numbers of 65 and 63, it almost just seems too easy. Now, Joe Public will win 43% of the time, but gee whiz, that's just one that I could see Vegas pulling the old okey doke on everyone who goes in there the day of the game. The game's in Vegas. All those people are going to line up and throw their $50 down on the over, and it's just going to seem way too easy, and they might all be left with holding toilet paper.
This is another one. We were talking about Clemson-Georgia. This, I could see a second half over where the game opens up. Like it's almost whoever falls behind first starts playing catch up, and all of a sudden the game breaks out and you kind of see the stars shine in a game like this. So 66.5, obviously way different than 62.5, but I feel like there's so much talent that I always seem to, on a fast track nonetheless, it just feels like it's a recipe for points, right? So that's kind of where I stand on that game. But again, it just feels like a lot of these games in week one, very polarizing. The biggest games to me, I don't even have like strong conviction because I just think I want to see a data point on these teams. I feel like now I'm going to give you a little self-reflection on last year. I feel like I went in last year very hard on my priors, and I had my opinion, and I was like, okay, I'm going to go to market with my opinion. I'm going to bet what I think about these teams. And I was wrong on a bunch, and I lost, and I kind of I have my priors, obviously, and I have my opinion. And now, especially these high-level games, I kind of want to be like, let me see if I'm right before I really wager in on it. Because, for example, I bet an under on USC's win total. Do I really need to bet LSU in this game to, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like I'm already there. I'm already having an opinion. Like, okay, I'm down on USC relative. Maybe I'll just sit back and I'll see how this looks. And maybe I'm wrong, and then I start to maybe work myself out of that one. So there's some self-growth as a sports bettor I'm trying this year. Got to learn from last year's disaster.
You know, it's part of the migration from having sports betting be just another hobby, like going to the golf course or the bar. It's like, yeah, it could be a fun thing to do, but when you mature and you learn from previous pitfalls, that is another way to become profitable, right? And to start to move into being in the black and having this be much more than just something to do. And I think that some reflection in losing wagers can teach you and can sharpen the pencil, so to say. And there's really nothing wrong with formulating an opinion and trying to even have some personal conviction in an opinion, but you still end up holding off, right? I have 38 opinions on the games for week one. I'm not going to make 38 plays. I might make 14 plays, but there's a lot of games where it's like, yeah, I'm kind of there, but I'm not quite all the way there. And I really think that maturation can help you, me, and anybody who is taking betting on college football, which is really the greatest thing on earth, taking it from just a recreational thing to do into a way to make money.
Yeah, 100%. Well said. So we went through a handful of these week 1 games. We were just talking the week 0 games, these FCS opponents, and a few on my radar before we get out of here. And we could go a little bit more rapid fire because these ones piqued my interest. And again, maybe like this is my opinion on how I view these teams more so. And they're also, in my opinion, some of them are more interesting, these FCS, FBS games in week 1. So I have 4 that I want to hit you on. I got to start, obviously, with North Dakota State traveling to Boulder to take on Colorado, because that's the game everyone's going to want to talk about. So Colorado, and Dion even said at Pac-12 Media Day, this is not a layup. This is a difficult game, and the market is well aware of this. North Dakota State's an 8.5-point road underdog, total of 58.5. Duck, what are your thoughts on this game? I mean, I'm looking at Connolly's SP Plus right now. North Dakota State is the second-ranked team in FCS per his numbers, number 2 offense, number 6 defense. How do you see this one playing out?
The real glaring question for me with the Bison is they had a great explosive receiver, Eli Green, and he was exceptional when it mattered most. He stepped up in the playoffs. He made catches over the middle. He was a breakaway type receiver, and he was slated to be the dude, and he transferred after spring. And that's a big loss, right? They return their quarterback, who's rock solid. They've got a bunch of guys back in the trench, in the defensive trench. The offensive line is going to take a little work. What I am really worried about is this. I know that just based on what North Dakota State was doing in these games against FBS competition when FBS teams would schedule them. Now, there was a dry point where they wouldn't even get played, but
I wonder why.
they were really good at throwing punches early and then mucking the game up and really grinding these games out and limiting chances. And I think while I'm pretty bearish on Colorado, just from the coordinator standpoint, and they've got some flash at the personnel position, some of the skill positions with their personnel, but I'm not a real believer that the way that they play offensive football is sustainable. And you know what happened after Sean Lewis got demoted? We saw that, right? We saw the sacks. We saw the breakdown in plays where they couldn't extend plays and couldn't make the magic happen. We saw the collapse with Colorado in the second half against Stanford, or you didn't see it if you shut the TV off and went to bed and woke up the next morning and saw, holy crap, how did they lose that game? And one thing that I think is that Colorado could be improved this year. I have them power rated. Honestly, if you have power ratings that you respect, or if you create your own, there are guys out there that'll do an FBS and an FCS, and then you can blend them together. And typically the top 5 or 6 FCS teams are power rated somewhere in the 60, 70, or 80 range of FBS. So you're talking about the bottom of the Big 12, the bottom of the ACC, or like top tier Mountain West. Well, Colorado and NDSU in the blended power ratings are about even. So you add 2.5 points for home field advantage. This should be about 3.5. What I worry about is North Dakota State not being able to get some of those early punches thrown and not be able to stay on the field. And then the big factor for me that I'm concerned about is they're playing at altitude, and are they gonna be tired in the second half? And will Colorado pull away? And I want to be on the Bison. I think the Bison are going to throw a punch and they'll hang in there for a half. But it wouldn't surprise me to see like a 14-10 type game at half, even with NDSU having the lead. And then it kind of falls apart and it's like a 38-24 type final.
So because I have kind of like a half-baked handicap that I think I'm going to bet, but North Dakota State, you believe they're probably going to slow this game down, right? They're going to try and smash mouth football, try and play physical with Colorado, try and test their depth a little bit, right?
I think they should, and I think they will. And teams have been able to do that against Colorado because their interior trench play was so poor.
So if you look, the final 3 games of the season, I believe Shermer took over for the last 4. So I couldn't find the last 4, but I imagine it followed this trend. Colorado over the last 3 games of the season played 4 seconds slower on average in terms of seconds per play relative to the season long mark. So when Shermer took over for Lewis, that flashed fast offense that Sean Lewis loves to run wasn't happening anymore. Colorado tried to play a more pro-style offense because Shermer comes from the NFL, has a ton of NFL experience, and Dion is trying to make Shedeur into an NFL caliber quarterback. They're going to play slower, which I imagine is going to bleed into this year because Shermer's the OC again. Isn't the under the move? And I know Colorado has dudes on the outside like Travis Hunter, and they're going to be able to hit the big passes. But a total of 58.5, the first half market is an out. I would imagine it's somewhere in the neighborhood of, 28.5, 29.5, something like that. I don't know. I think this game can be much slower paced and cagey because you already know that Colorado, there's negative press about them and who knows what the state of the locker room is, but you could imagine Dion is saying this isn't a layup game, so he is at the most taking it somewhat seriously. Who knows what the roster is? So I think maybe a cagey first half before this really opens up, and maybe the floodgates open in the second half. So I have written down under 58.5 and first half when that is released. I definitely have a strong lean towards the under, just given how Colorado is set to play this season.
I like it. I don't have much to add, and we're in lockstep. It's actually on my big board behind me. I've got some stuff that I'm kind of sniffing around on my radar, and a first half under. I'd like 29.5, 30. Maybe you catch a book asleep and they hang a 31.5. Absolutely an under for the first half.
Yeah. So the other one, another like banger game on the radar. South Dakota State traveling to Stillwater to take on Oklahoma State. The Jackrabbits are the projected. Again, I'm just going off Bill Connolly. So, Duck, if you have your own ratings that are different, but Bill Connolly ranks South Dakota State with margin the best team in the FCS this year. They are the number 1 defense with a huge gap, and they are the number 5 offense in a pretty crowded region, a crowded group. Again, I'm just going off his SP plus numbers to give some sort of frame of reference for those that aren't as familiar. But South Dakota State, a wagon in the FCS. They're going to Stillwater to take on an Oklahoma State team that I'm relatively high on. I think have some offensive firepower. The Jag players are catching 9.5, total 54.5. Before I ask you about South Dakota State in this game, is there one that you're more confident can really hang with the other?
They're both unique situations, and they're both just 2 totally different matchups. If a gun was to my head right now when I had to make a play on one of these 2 teams to cover the number, I would play the Bison.
Okay.
So interesting fact, and I'll give you the quick sum up. This summer, I moved my family to Wilmington, North Carolina to live on the beach. For 20 years, I lived in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and I got all the news on the Jacks. And so it was a team that everybody followed. I know a lot of intel from this team. Mark Gronowski comes back. He was offered high 6-figure NIL to transfer out, and he considered it. He put his name in the portal. He would have made a lot of money, and he chose to stay. And so John Stingelmeyer, their longtime head coach who transitioned them from Division II all the way to the FCS ranks and really started the momentum. There was no beat. There was no beat dropped when he retired and their new staff took over. And they do lose some pieces. They lose some explosive pieces in the running back room. Guys that are going to be hard to replace on the outside. The Jonke twins at receiver who are now in the Houston Texans camp. But they've got a receiver, Griffin Wilde, who was recruited by some FBS teams in the area and decided to stay home and play at South Dakota State. He played in the rotation as like a number 3, number 4 receiver, and they run 3 and 4 receiver sets. So Griffin Wilde was a guy who saw the field a lot as a true freshman, and he's going to be the number 1 this year, and he is super explosive. He can catch the ball in traffic. He's got breakaway speed. He's going to be the dude this year. So if you're if you're going to watch FCS football, Griffin Wilde's a name to certainly keep an eye on at receiver. The offensive line is down from what they were the last 2 years, but they're still one of the best offensive lines in the Missouri Valley Football Conference, and that would just correlate to a top-tier FCS line. Where I think that SDSU is going to struggle is in their front seven. They only have 3 returning starters, and they lose some key pieces. So when you're going to Stillwater to match up against Oklahoma State, can you stop the run? Can you get off the field on third down? And is the talent disparity when you get into the late stages of the third and fourth quarter, is it going to be too much? And in this particular spot, I mean, South Dakota State is going to certainly be the team to beat in FCS competition. They haven't lost an FCS game since 2021. They haven't lost a game at all since their 7-3 loss at Iowa to open the 22 season, where Iowa scored those 7 points, not on a touchdown, but on 2 safeties and a field goal. And so SDSU is very accustomed to winning, and they're very comfortable in all different styles of games, and they've been just head and shoulders the prime example of how you build a program at the FCS level. I just don't know if they're going to be able to keep it within 9.5 at Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State last year, they had to figure some things out with who their quarterback was going to be and what their offensive identity was going to be, and it took about a month to do so. Now that particular situation has kind of worked its way out, I mean, you really saw with Oklahoma State too, you really saw their season turn. They lost a really just a lackluster, bad, apathetic performance at home. South Alabama came in there and blasted them by 4 touchdowns. And then they went up to Ames and Rocco beat them. And then they played K-State on a Friday night at home. They were plus 11, and they won the game on the field, totally turned around their whole season. And I think Oklahoma State will be a team that they return so much on offense and defense, and a lot of the returning production and look at all the metrics, they're going to be a top team in the Big 12. It just kind of seems like, excuse me, just kind of seems like the perception is South Dakota State is a very, very, very good FCS team, so they should be able to go down there and compete. Would not surprise me if Oklahoma State ends up winning by 17 to 20 points.
Yeah, Gundy has a tendency to play with his food in this spot, which would give me pause on betting Oklahoma State, but I do agree that I'm big on the Pokes, and I think that they should be able to take care of business, but who knows? Again, I mean, last year they only beat Central Arkansas by 14 in their opener, so we'll see how this goes. So
part of the problem with trying to figure out what they were going to do on offense and who their quarterback was going to be, I think.
Yeah. So we'll see how that goes. Another one that I'm interested in is Southern Illinois traveling to BYU. Southern Illinois rated as the second best defense according to SP+. And this is a BYU team where I was reading a camp report. They don't know who's starting at quarterback. LJ Morton isn't practicing their stud running back, but he's expected to be ready to go. Offensive line not clicking just yet. A lot of questions for a BYU team that I already don't think so highly of. We'll see. I also was doing a little bit of looking around because last year BYU made waves hiring Jay Hill away from Weber State.
Yeah.
Former head coach is now the DC at BYU. I was just clicking around. SIU beat Jay Hill's Weber State 34-31. Again, this was in 2021, so a few years, maybe there's some turnover, but coaching staff still the same. Does that carry over against this BYU defense that last year really struggled, could not get any pressure at the quarterback? They were really relying on turnovers. Can Southern Illinois slow this game down, Duck? They are catching I'm doing a bad job of manning.
19.5.
19.5. Again, playing in Provo, it could be some altitude, but it's a low total of 48.5. So expected grind. Is BYU's offense really going to run this up on Southern Illinois?
Well, a couple things to ask yourself. Where is BYU headed? And is Kalani Sitake, is he running the team or is somebody else running the team? Because they've got away from their identity last year, and it didn't go well when they got into the meat and potatoes of Big 12 play. And I don't think it's going to go well this season, and neither do the oddsmen, as the regular season win is 5.5. So are thinking, or maybe it's 4.5 now, but they're thinking a bowl game is out of reach, and I do too. And I'm not sure that, first of all, I mean, Jerry Bohannon, I don't know, man. I'm not a fan of that guy. And I think that BYU
he's probably gonna get hurt. I would say he wins the starting job and he gets hurt very quickly, if I had to guess.
Very likely, based on what we've seen. They lose a lot of their big physical receivers that BYU has kind of had a recent history of having these tall receivers that they can throw jump balls to, and they go up and win those 50-50 balls. A lot of those guys are gone. And I'm just I'm not sold on BYU having the offensive firepower to blow out Southern Illinois. And BYU struggled last year in their home opener against Sam Houston State, right? That was a game that was 7-0 early, and then it was 7-0 with 45 seconds left in the second quarter. And Sam Houston was throwing into the end zone and ended up they either missed a field goal or went for it on fourth down and didn't get it. But BYU does not really have a lot of the potent firepower that I think you need in order to cover a line against a good top-rated FCS team, right? This isn't Weber State. This isn't Southern Utah. This isn't Idaho State that you can just roll in and blast. I firmly expect Southern Illinois to bring it. And I think defensively, they're going to really put BYU on edge. I'm not going to call for Southern Illinois necessarily to have a chance to win the game in the fourth quarter, but Southern Illinois beat Northern Illinois last year after Northern Illinois had beaten Boston College. And so they beat an FCS foe last year. And in 2022, they were in a similar underdog role against Southeast Missouri, against Northwestern, and lost by 7. And then finally, 2021, they were at K-State plus 18. So real similar role, lost by 8, and hung with K-State. And year in and year out, Southern Illinois plays up, and they play their best football against FBS competition. And they've beaten FBS teams very recently. And so it's not going to be a shock to them to come into this environment. And when I saw this line come out, I immediately took out a position on Southern Illinois. I was hoping for about 13 or 14.
What did it open
at? I think it opened at 20 flat, and when I went to lock in, it bumped to 19.5, so I hit submit. But I am really comfortable with the Salukis being able to muck this game up. They play really well, actually, on the road, and I think they'll be comfortable enough in an environment. The talent disparity will not be as drastic as what it could be with other games involving FBS and FCS. I think this is a good spot to back a team catching almost 3 scores. Yeah,
cool. Glad we agree, because they're making the round robin.
And the other thing, too, I'll say is
I had Sam Houston last year in that game. They
I did, too. Plus 23.5, and it was just the cover was never in question. It was great.
No, there was, I think, they go down 14-0, and I quickly thought, I was are they gonna let go of the rope now and not cover on top of not winning the game? One of those where that happens more in college basketball. But no, I completely agree. I think BYU, first of all, low total. This is trending in the wrong direction for them. So
yeah, it was so funny in that BYU Sam Houston game last year when Sam Houston was down 7-0. They had a chance to score. They didn't score. BYU goes up 14-0, I think, early in the third quarter. Sam Houston gets down there again, misses a field goal. And then just kind of that mindset Sam Houston might have been in, but there was about 4 minutes to go in the game. They were down 14-0, and it was 4th and 1 on the 37 going in to score, and they punted.
I remember that.
4 minutes to go. You're not even trying to win the game at that point. Just keep it respectable.
So before we get out of here, and we've gone longer than I expected as this tends to go, but if you're still listening, we got one more FCS game I want to mention, and then I can let Duck rattle off a few of his favorite bets. But Duke Elon, this is one that caught my eye as well. Again, this is a Duke team I'm not high on. You listen to the ACC preview. Elon's catching 23.5, and I'm curious, Duck, again, can Duke rattle off margin like this? There's a team that's replenishing so much of their roster relative to last year. They lose pretty much everyone of substance on the defense side of the ball. They are transitioning to Malik Murphy at quarterback. TBD how that works. They bring in Jonathan Brewer from SMU. He was recently their quarterback coach. Diaz, obviously a defensive mind. And I'm in a bit of a push and pull here because I look at Diaz when he was at Miami and they smoked some of the lower class teams they played. Like they were easily winning 62-0. That's Miami, though. There's a talent level there that Duke does not have right now. Elon last year, they played Wake Forest, and they were getting blown out early in the game. They ended up losing 37-17 in what was a down year for the Phoenix. They were a 33.5-point underdog. So the market's moved in, the market is showing the difference between Wake and Elon. Elon was pretty much smoked in that game. It wasn't necessarily competitive, but they got some late scores after going down 24-0 at half. Do you think Elon can hang in this game?
I do. In fact, I bet Elon plus 23.5, and I couldn't get the bet in fast enough when I saw 24.5. Still took it at 23.5, but everything that you sentimented on Elon is they don't get blown out a lot, and they fight pretty hard, and the travel is not very drastic. These teams are actually very close together, so I mean it'll be same-day travel for Elon, but Duke had an impressive 2-year run, and they kind of put themselves on the map. But this year, you'll find, in my personal opinion, it's kind of back to rebuilding for Duke. I think that they did make a good hire, but it's going to take a year or two with all the pieces that Duke lost. The offensive firepower that we became accustomed to for Duke is going to be gone. I'm not sold on really their quarterback situation is kind of unsettling to me. Skill guys will be okay. The offensive line is a complete mess, and it's a complete rebuild. They sent their best 2 offensive linemen to the pros. They lost just a ton of talent. They did bring in an Ivy League transfer to start at left tackle, but I mean, who really knows what Penn transfer is going to be? And certainly won't overmatch anything that Elon brings on the D-line. This is definitely a spot that I had circled even before the line in red ink. I had a fade opportunity for Duke, which I plan on doing all season, really. I've got a couple of different spots circled, and I also took a regular season win position under on Duke 5.5. Opened at 6.5. I wish I would have done. Elon, I think there's no question that they'll be able to keep this game really a lot closer than what people will think.
Yeah, love it. So, Duck, you've given me much of your time. Where do you stand in the rest of the card before we get out of here?
It's a long preview. We've covered a lot of really good stuff for week 0 action and week 1 action. I'll just give 2 FCS tidbits that you can put in your back pocket for later. In week 0, there's an FCS matchup between McNeese and Tarleton State. Tarleton State is a pretty solidified middle-of-the-road FCS squad, and McNeese was 0-10 last year, and the wheels really fell off, and they were just an absolutely terrible team and had a really tough season. Montana's quarterback, McDowell, transferred to McNeese, and McNeese did a decent job in the transfer portal. And so I have a projected line on this game of Tarleton minus 31.5. And if that line is anywhere close to that, McNeese is going to be totally different. I'm not going to say they're going to win the Southland or anything like that, but McNeese is going to be catching a ton of points very early on, and they're going to be a play-on team as a big dog. So if you see a 28 or a 29 or 30, take McNeese in that week 0 game. And then actionable week 1 right now, quick hitter that I'll say, Howard at Rutgers. The line is 34.5. The total is 47.5, and I think the total is a mistake. I took the over at 47.5, and I would play that up to 51 or 52. And the reason why, Howard, their last 3 games against FBS foes, they've scored 20 points in each game. They're a pass-happy offense. They throw the ball around. They don't pack it in the second half when they're down big and just run the ball and get out of there. They continue to work on their stuff. They throw the ball, and they've scored 3 touchdowns in each of their last 3 games against FBS competition. And Rutgers has a history in these FCS games of doing the same thing. Last year they played Wagner. They were laying 47. It was 42-3. And in the waning seconds of the fourth quarter, Rutgers had first and goal on the 4-yard line, and they could have taken knees, and they actively tried to score and cover, and they successfully did. Maybe they were laying 45, I'm sorry, but they won the game 49-3. So you'll have Greg Schiano knowing what to do against these FCS teams. They don't take snaps off. Rutgers is going to put up a massive number, and Howard will find a way to get to 20 or so. So I think you're looking at something like 49-20 or 55-20, but over 47.5 has to be a play between Howard and Rutgers in week 1.
Hell yeah. So for me, best bets from the show, Elon 23.5, SIU. I bet it while we were recording some more. It is now 18.5. So 18.5 we'll call it for the show.
Some good CLV for us.
Michigan, Fresno State under 40.5. And I'm absolutely certain that was me because I literally I hit submit, and then I looked up at my screen and it was changed to 18.5. So there's no way, unless someone is listening, unless my fiance in the other room is also jamming SIU against BYU in week 1. So again, that's Michigan, Fresno under 48.5, Elon plus 23.5, SIU plus 18.5. And yeah, that's it for me. And then we will be back with some more week 1 stuff as well, a little sampler while I get started. So Duck, I appreciate the time. This has been a lengthy preview, but I think a necessary one. You can follow him on Twitter at StepOnADuck1. We are sure to have you on again as the season goes on. You can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach. The plays from this episode are in the Google Sheet below, as well as a sign-up code for Rhythm. If you want to build your own betting model this college football season, make sure you check out Rhythm. And you can follow me on Twitter at Reed Wallach for a ton of yelling into my phone soon as week 0 is upon us, and you are sure to hear a lot of tweets from me. So until next time, we will be back with a little My Guy, Not My Guy preview before the season, and then we're full steam ahead. Week 1 preview, week 2 preview, and so on and so forth. Duck, until next time, man, enjoy the rest of your summer, what's left of it, and then it's time to sit on the couch and watch some football.
You bet. We got some great plays.